to Innovation in Government from the FedRAMP Headliner Summit in Washington, D.C., presented by Carahsoft. I'm your host, Francis Rose. The cybersecurity landscape is changing all the time. The federal government's constant in that landscape is the Federal Risk and Authorization Management Program, FedRAMP. The General Services Administration rolled out FedRAMP more than a decade ago. The goal was to provide a standardized approach to securing the cloud computing capability agencies were just starting to explore in the early 2010s. Over the next hour, you'll learn about FedRAMP's past, present, and future from leaders in government and industry. They'll give you their assessments of how FedRAMP's doing now in fulfilling the vision its creators in GSA and on Capitol Hill had for the program at the beginning, and those leaders will explore the progress and potential of the original outcome FedRAMP was supposed to facilitate, securing the cloud for the federal government. First up, one of the Capitol Hill creators of FedRAMP, Congressman Jerry Connolly, was the leadoff speaker at the FedRAMP Headliner Summit. In this highlight of his remarks to the conference, he reviews where FedRAMP's come from and where he'd like to see it go.
Thank you so much for inviting me to speak with you today. I want to congratulate Carahsoft on its leadership role in hosting this 5th annual FedRAMP event, as well as its success in managing one of the largest portfolios of FedRAMP authorized vendors. After leading the effort to pass FedRAMP 6 times in the House of Representatives over a span of 5 years, it was finally signed into law last December. Last year's enactment will protect those who invested millions in FedRAMP authorizations against potential wholesale changes to the program by any future presidential administration. It also created the Federal Secure Cloud Advisory Committee to ensure that industry concerns related both to time and cost can be addressed as part of Congress's ongoing oversight of the FedRAMP PMO. The FSCAC will ensure effective and ongoing coordination of agency adoption, use, authorization, monitoring, acquisition, and security of cloud computing products and services to enable agency mission and administrative priorities. I also remain committed to encouraging cloud adoption through continued FTAR oversight hearings. Our consistent bipartisan efforts have resulted in the closure of 4,000 outdated or duplicative data centers, saving the taxpayers $4.7 billion in that category alone. Not many bills can claim that kind of saving. New toys and innovations are fun, and they can help agencies meet their missions. But getting the fundamentals right is what ensures government can deliver for our constituents, and that's exactly what I plan to continue to do. Today, there are over 300 CSOs participating in FedRAMP, and over 30% of FedRAMP authorized CSOs are small businesses. Furthermore, 160 agencies participate in FedRAMP and have initiated more than 1,900 agency reuses of authorized products. That's a lot of progress. As compared to the early days of FedRAMP, both the time it takes for a federal software vendor to get certified and the related costs have declined significantly. Based on GSA's fiscal 2022 FedRAMP customer survey, FedRAMP PMO is now doing well in a number of areas, particularly customer experience, including an increase of 2% in overall customer satisfaction from just last year. 84% of respondents reported having pleasant interactions with FedRAMP, and 85% of respondents agreed or strongly agreed that FedRAMP promotes the adoption of secure cloud services across the U.S. government. Federal software vendors with cloud-based solutions have overwhelmingly applied for FedRAMP authorization, and it's projected that FedRAMP High will, over the next 1 to 3 years, become the minimum standard. Looking at those numbers, it is unsurprising that FedRAMP has become an essential element of how the federal government modernizes its own IT systems and ensures that the cloud-based solutions it acquires are cyber resilient. In fiscal year 2022, the the federal government spent a total of $12.3 billion on cloud goods and services. That's a 30% increase from just a year before. This trajectory makes it clear that cloud adoption will continue to escalate at a very rapid pace. Federal cloud is why it's no surprise that it's become an essential component of the federal government's digital and IT infrastructure. First, federal agencies can take advantage of cloud providers' investments into security and infrastructure protections to strengthen their defenses. Second, cloud increases employee collaboration and efficiency, such as a reduction of document redundancies, elimination of information silos, and the improvement of information sharing. And third, cloud computing allows agencies to operate more nimbly and to rescale their data center footprint based on their computing capacity in real time. This flexibility allows the government to capture previously unavailable cost savings. We also need to work to optimize our data, and I look forward to working with the administration to more efficiently scope our cloud contracts to fit the federal government's needs. While our government should embrace ways to improve federal agencies' capabilities through rapid cloud adoption, it must be done right. GAO recently released a study outlining 4 challenges federal agencies need to overcome to fully realize the benefits of transitioning to cloud services. First, the federal government needs to attract, recruit, and maintain a skilled IT workforce in order to support and further cloud adoption efforts. Second, cloud service procurement contracts must clearly state service and performance expectations, such as what constitutes a security breach, the explicit notification responsibilities, or agreed upon data and network management practices. Third, federal agencies need to accurately track and report cloud spending and savings to optimize acquisition and operating costs. And fourth, the federal government must have a standardized approach to selecting and authorizing the use of cloud services that meet robust federal security requirements. The government's cloud security risks do not stop at the bounds of its federal networks. Industries highly regulated but not controlled by the federal government, especially those designated as critical infrastructure sectors, are experiencing increasing rates of cloud adoption. Therefore, we must ask ourselves if our current policy tools are effective at governing cloud's increasing complexity and criticality. I want to thank everyone who attended this wonderful event today. I look forward to working with all of you as we embrace cloud computing technology in order to improve security, increase cost savings, and improve agency operations and especially customer experience throughout the federal government. Thank you and have a great day.
Congressman Jerry Connolly kicking off the FedRAMP Headliner Summit. The Department of Homeland Security is leveraging the cloud and the security FedRAMP provides for it for a huge customer experience initiative. That initiative is just one example of the CX emphasis in cyber. I asked Mark Lucas, the Director of Cloud Computing at the Department of Homeland Security, what's driving the cloud-CX relationship. Mark Lucas is the Director of Cloud Computing at the Department of Homeland Security. It's great to see you. Thanks for joining me today. What do you think is driving this heavy emphasis, not just at this conference, but more broadly across the government technology community on customer experience, particularly regarding cloud and regarding security like FedRAMP?
Yeah, well, great question. Thanks for having me today. I think what's primarily driving is the White House, the initiative and the executive order. That's primarily it. But I mean, DHS has been at the forefront of customer service for a long time. But when you talk about codifying it in processes, procedures, from the onset of application development or whatever we're talking about, whatever IT service delivery that we are using to enable the mission and provide services to the public, it all starts there. We've been doing it for years, but that we established federal first, a customer experience directorate, just stood it up. That team has hit the ground running as a result of the executive order. We got some really fine people running that. And they're actually starting to work with all of our components that are at the forefront of customer experience, like Customs and Border Patrol at the border, the Transportation Security Administration at the airports, Federal Emergency Management Agency in the disaster locations and around this country. I was a part of them for many years, so I have a special place in my heart for them and some of the colleagues that are still there. But I think that's what primarily drove it. But I mean, it's important to note that customer experience is important. I mean, we are responsible for stewarding taxpayer dollars, some of which are yours and mine. So as we continue to do that, we want to make sure that we provide the best customer experience. And the more transparent that we are, the more trust and credibility we have with the American public, and thus helps us to deliver the mission much quicker and better for the public.
How does that intersect with the job of someone whose title is the Director of Cloud Computing at the agency? I'm not sure if I were just starting from scratch, I would put somebody who's on the front lines at some of those agencies that you just mentioned standing right next to, as far as delivering service to that citizen,
Yep.
the person who runs cloud computing at the agency.
Yeah, so interesting question as well. So much like I said about the transparency piece. So I manage all the back end to our cloud service provider environments and all that means for our critical systems that provide services to the American public. Now, as a result of that, there's an internal customer experience process that happens to make sure that people that need to access cloud services to do their mission engage with my team. And so that translates across the organization from the lowest to the highest employee to make sure that we're doing that for everyone, both internally and externally, because the transparency is important. The delivery of the service to the public is more important, but creating the actual process to make sure that we're delivering it so that the public is focusing on the actual service and not the technology is my job on the back end. So that's how that kind of intersects.
Yeah, that's another theme that I've taken away from this conference so far, is that people are trying to figure out solutions on both the government side and the industry side to make it completely transparent to the end user, whether it's an internal customer or an external customer citizen.
Yes.
That person doesn't know there's a security solution in place. They just know they're going about their business. Am I reading that the right way?
I think you're right. And the more the government can do to provide services like the commercial sector, when you access your email, whatever flavor it is, you don't expect to have any issue. You expect the emails to come in without having to worry about the back-end services and support and all the stuff to include security that are happening on the back end. You just want to make sure it works. And much like that, the public who we serve needs to just access the services and not worry about the cloud security and stuff on the other side. Now, there is the cognitive part that they're sure that we're doing it the best way we can, maximizing the investment, ensuring that we're stewarding taxpayer dollars, and make sure we're providing the security for the data that some of them are actually providing to get the services they want. So it's important, but all of that technology, it all ties into the customer service experience as an enabler. It's not the end goal. I mean, I'm a technologist by trade, and I've been doing cloud and cybersecurity for many years. I served 22 years in the military, and I've been in BEMA for many years, 9 years to be exact, and I spent 4 years at the department doing various roles. And that experience, the customer experience, should be at the forefront of every decision we make, whether that customer is on the inside or they're on the outside. Ultimately, it's providing services to the American public.
I was at the event, and I want to say it was a year or maybe a little longer than that ago, where CIO Eric Heisen rolled out this customer experience initiative. And the buzz that it created in the community, I think, was interesting after that rollout, because I think a lot of people said, not in a manner to mean, oh, they shouldn't be doing that, but like, oh, that's interesting that they would undertake that. We see the importance of it. What kind of have been the fruits of that work that you've seen in the year or so that this has been underway, and how has that manifested itself through the work that you're doing on the cloud at DHS?
Okay, so another great question. So the way that's helped in our mission is, I use a perfect example. I traveled internationally here recently, and I came back through the airport, and I went to the line to go through the port of embarkation. I said this on the conference earlier, and I went through, usually you go through, you have your passport and your ticket ready, and you show it to the agent, and they walk through whatever scanning they're going to do, look at a database. But this time was a little different, and it was a result of the customer experience stuff that we're doing. So literally, they put us off to the side, and the gentleman at TSA had a camera, Back-end AI supported it. He scanned my face, didn't check a passport, didn't have to check anything. That AI in the back end checked all my records, checked my ticket, checked everything it needed to check, and he said, go ahead and go through, sir. And I went right through the airport. Didn't have to stop by the agent, didn't have to stop by anybody. So the cloud has enabled that because it allows seamless transfer of services to the American public. And that's in pilot right now, but pretty soon the rest of the public will see it as well. And some of the public was a recipient of that because some of those same people were in the line with me. So it was very interesting.
We just have a couple of minutes left, Mark. You get to be on the cutting edge of a lot of things like that, I imagine. It strikes me probably are in a position to look over the horizon too.
Yes.
What are some of the things that you're seeing that are coming because of the cloud or because of the customer experience initiatives or a marrying of the two that are not quite ready for prime time, but that are coming because of the result of the evolution of some of this technology?
Yeah, I think, AI is the buzzword of the week, more than a week. But there is a lot of technology behind delivering services to the American public. And whether you're in the commercial sector or you're in the federal government, the end result is the same, giving the customer what they need as they access it. Now, so I have the advantage of being on the inside and managing cloud computing. So I'm one of the senior strategic and technical advisors to what we're doing with both data center and cloud. And so there is a homogenation, the best way to put it, of leveraging all that back end so that it's ambiguous to anybody that's actually seeing it. So we have abstracted all of that stuff in the back from the American public. When the American public comes in and they need to access something, they're looking at a computer screen, whether it's on a tablet, a phone, or a workstation, a laptop, whatever. They don't care about the back-end technology. So as I start looking at the cloud service providers who are enabling all of this, the machine learning and the AI and the algorithms and generative AI, all that stuff, it should be seamless to the end user. You see the stuff with ChatGPT, it's all over the news. But I think what's coming is we will get so good at providing those services that there will be no talk of the technology. And right now it's the talk of the technology because it bounces around from CIO to CIO because we need to provide better services and leverage that latest technology. But I think what you're going to see is you're going to see more seamless approach to delivering stuff to the public, whether it's somebody at the worst time of their lives in a disaster, or it's on the border with CBP, or it's in an airport getting screened, much like the example I just provided. So you will see more seamless integration and more of the government acting like the commercial environment because we have a lot of smart people on the inside now. Myself, I don't count in that, but I get to work with some very smart people, some amazing colleagues who are actually helping to get all this done.
You may be too humble, but I'm grateful for your time today, Mark Lucas. Thanks very much.
Thank you, sir.
Mark Lucas, Director of Cloud Computing at DHS. Federal agencies are starting to ask the same question about FedRAMP that companies have been asking for years. Those agencies want to see companies get through the approval process more cost-effectively and more efficiently. I asked Kevin Mulligan, Senior Manager for Government Affairs and Public Policy at Google Cloud, how he'd like to see both of those things happen. Kevin, it's great to see you. Thanks for joining me today. What would you like to see happen to make the FedRAMP process smoother, easier, less expensive for companies to get through?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the imperative here is digital modernization as quickly as possible. Companies are innovating at a rapid pace. They're giving demand signals to the federal government that they have solutions that will help meet their mission. The challenge is that the investment of these small businesses and going through that process is significant. It's time, it's money, it's overhead, it's burning cash as you await final authorization. So anything that can be done to accelerate that process is going to be extremely important. I think if you look at how FedRAMP is designed and the policies that originated it, they might be a bit dated. They might be in need of some rework. If you're bringing a Tesla in for an emissions check, you're probably answering the wrong questions. So I'd love to see them start at the top, just review how they assess what technology should be brought on board. And then you look at resources, and it comes down to the process being a bottleneck that's inhibiting the rate at which technology can be brought to bear and products and services can be delivered. So that comes back to staffing and funding. You see companies are working around going to the agencies. I think FedRAMP numbers are around 70% of the applications are coming up through the agencies. Those agencies also need the resources to do the similar due diligence. And so you need to have, if the federal government is serious about digital modernization, ensuring that those checks and balances and those processes are fully staffed, fully resourced to be able to bring in these innovative solutions. As we look at empowering our partners, their solutions ultimately are inhibited and throttling the rate at which business is generated and revenue can be recognized. But it's also the end user that's screaming for those modern solutions that they see in the private sector that they desperately want in the public sector. And they're just challenged to bring those on board in a timely fashion. And so as innovation outpaces the rate at which products are brought online and certified, now you find that you're buying yesterday's technology for tomorrow, and that makes us vulnerable for the future. And as a result, you see additional controls going above and beyond what FedRAMP minimum baseline standard is asking for. That's adding more time, more churn, and more expense to the process, and ultimately not meeting the ultimate mission that FedRAMP was put in place to provide.
One of the areas where I think the Defense Department, the military services are emphasizing that I don't see as much in the civilian sector is an ongoing reminder, we have to go faster. Is that something that is happening in the civilian agencies, do you think, and it maybe just isn't as obvious? Or is that maybe some room for improvement there where they could say, hey, wait a minute, we need to go faster in the digital modernization that you just described?
I think you're hitting the nail on the head. I mean, you need to accelerate the pace at which you bring these online. There's a lag in the process that is ultimately it needs to be addressed. I think the process is focused on specific checks and balances rather than outcomes. We'd love to see it be more outcome driven. Referencing that Tesla coming in for an emissions check, there's just fundamentally different ways to achieve the same outcomes that were not envisioned when the original rules were written. And that's where I think if we go back and revise, if there's a continual update of what those requirements are and what the minimum standard actually is, not necessarily how you do it, but the outcome that results from the solution that you bring to bear, there would be an added benefit for the entire process.
Very quick final thought. What do you think that looks like without having to make everybody go through the process again when you change and update what the process looks like now?
Yeah, I think if you take an outcomes-based approach, then you look at the solutions that are currently in place. If they're achieving the necessary outcomes, then you're good to go.
Kevin, thanks for joining me. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Francis.
Kevin Mulligan from Google Cloud. The General Services Administration launched FedRAMP in 2012 to meet the security needs of the federal government as it moved to the cloud. The threats then, though, were a lot different than they are today. I asked Bill Rowan, Vice President of Public Sector for Splunk, how FedRAMP's evolved over time, along with the threat landscape. Bill Rowan of Splunk, great to see you again. What's your sense of the way that FedRAMP's evolved over time, both to serve the government organizations that use it and the vendors that help those government organizations through it?
Well, Francis, first, thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to join you. I think we've seen quite a great deal of evolution over the time of FedRAMP. Clearly, there are a lot more companies that are now going through the FedRAMP process, whether it be moderate, high, or even on the DoD side, impact level 5 and 6. So there's no question, I think there's been a tremendous amount of structure put around it, and I think that we as a vendor have learned that our intellectual property, while we think it may be good, there are sometimes holes that get overlooked or areas that maybe as a manufacturer we didn't think necessarily was a security concern based upon the way the applications were deployed. But as you move to the cloud environment, or for that matter, a multi-cloud environment, it always has to have a second set of eyes look at things. And I think FedRAMP has helped codify that and put some structure around it to ensure that everybody's playing by the exact same rules. And as a taxpayer and as an agency, this is giving us a tremendous amount of ensuring that everybody's got the controls in place that we can ensure these environments are safe. I would also add, At Splunk, we see a significant number of our enterprise customers wanting to use the FedRAMP environment, financial services, healthcare, PII data, where they think an extra set of controls or the controls that the FedRAMP office has implemented, they feel better about having their data in that type of environment versus a non-FedRAMP environment.
It's interesting that it's become a benchmark, not just for the federal government to use. A lot of discussion here about what states are doing with FedRAMP, and now to hear that private sector organizations are looking to the federal government for a kind of a platform, a clearance of cyber levels of security is pretty interesting.
Yes, and in fact, since I've come to Splunk, we've gone ahead and applied for and received our state ramp accreditation. In fact, we're building in place a process longer term where the other products that we bring to market, the new products, whether acquired or otherwise, will all go through the FedRAMP, and then from the FedRAMP leveraging that to the state ramp process. We think that gives us the broadest set of controls for customers' information, whether at the state, municipal level. And in fact, I'd point out that interestingly, when I look at the state level, they don't really have, at least in the cybersecurity area, they may not have the strength of talent or size of organizations that we do in some federal agencies. So we see a significant amount of the business from the very, very beginning moving to the cloud, and state ramp only helps give them the satisfaction and the security that they're following the best controls out there.
For many years, the companies that either are part of the process or would like to be part of the process have talked about the speed or lack thereof to get through it. This is the first conference or first gathering of people, I think, where I've heard kind of a critical mass of government people saying the same thing. What does that look like in a more hospitable environment to getting people through the process?
It's interesting. I look at it's probably two different ways. Certainly, I've been with a company that went through it from the very, very beginning and may have had some of those holes I was alluding to earlier. But I will tell you, I think the process now. See, inside of FedRAMP, you have really kind of two different paths. You have the jab, where you can go with the customer being your sponsor. We have found that having the customer be your partner in this process is actually been a lot faster than the process we went through with the jab. There's a lot more flexibility. The customer's more highly invested. You help work on it together. I get the concern, but I think that if you're going to do business in the federal government, or for that matter, the state government arena, I think it's fair to say we're going to demand very high standards. And if your intellectual property is not up to that standard, do we really want to have it in areas where we might be talking about information around the Department of Energy, information around DoD, law enforcement data? These are all very important issues. And so I think that while the process, in my opinion, has gotten a little bit better than it has been, I will tell you that I think it's the right type of rigor and controls we put in place. I'll point out one other quick item. I think for those companies that had their intellectual property developed in one of the hyperscalers to begin with, Microsoft or Amazon most notably, they've built a lot of their data centers and a lot of their operations to the FedRAMP standard to the very beginning. So if you're deploying a cloud native app in one of those environments and it comes time for FedRAMP, the chances are you're going to inherit an awful lot of controls that have been in place from the very beginning, and that's accelerating the process, actually not slowing it down.
It's great to see you again, Bill. Thanks for your time today.
Francis, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Bill Rowan of Splunk. More innovation in government is coming. Stay with us. Listen at fedgovtoday.com and everywhere you get your shows. Don't miss out on the conversation. Follow the podcast today. Welcome back. Federal government cyber leaders tell me that changing security landscape means agencies will have to change every aspect of their cyber operations. One of those aspects is audits. I asked Tutu Awade, the acting deputy director of the audit division for FEMA, what a cyber audit consists of now, what she looks for, and how those audits work. Tutu Awade of FEMA, it's great to see you. Thank you for joining me today. What do cyber audits look like in 2023? How do they work? What are you looking for? And all of that.
The evolving threat landscape has required that the cyber audit evolved from what it used to be, where it was traditional perimeter IT focused. These days, risk management comes into play a lot. Access control is a prime focus of cyber audits. and folks have to be careful to not just be compliance-based, but also focusing a lot on security. So it's changed a lot due to the evolving threat landscape to require that risk management be a great part of it.
Mm-hmm. What does risk management look like in the cyber realm? What are organizations doing to assess their risks? And what do you see folks doing once they know what the risk landscape is look like, how they prioritize which ones they need to address and how they want to go about addressing them?
Since no one has infinity money or infinity time, it's adopting tools that will enable you to identify what kind of threats are applicable to your organization or to your system. And then once you realize that, just understanding, you conduct the risk assessment and then check to see which ones are truly a threat in our scenario, in our organization, and then focus on those ones to apply your funding, your security control, your time and your effort to those areas.
Are the tools for risk assessment the same as they've always been, or are they continuing to evolve too?
They are continuing to evolve. Tools back in the day, define whatever the day is, used to be more point in time focused. Vulnerability management tools where you identify your vulnerabilities, you take the time to patch them. These days they have evolved to include real-time or near real-time tools that enable you to identify maybe user behavior. Where is that person trying to access this from? Is the device healthy? Is the device, does it have all of the patches, or is it healthy enough to access the network? And so real-time, near real-time tools are helping to ensure that we're focusing on actual threats to our network and to our resources.
Is there, I guess, rather than asking, what is the connection between risk assessment and risk management? Because it seems to me, the way you've described it and others have on this program, risk assessment, especially with the real-time visibility that you just talked about, enables you to see what's happening now, what's happening in the moment, or what's happened recently. And risk management is what could happen in the future. Is there an intersection? What's that intersection look like?
I think risk management encompasses all of what you're doing to identify risk, respond to risk, assess risk. And so risk assessment is just a subset or a part of risk management and all that you're doing. Risk assessment is identifying the risk, responding to the risk, understanding what impact the risk poses to your organization. So I think I would say that risk assessment is just a subset of risk management.
You talked at the beginning of this conversation about what's probably the most important concept here, and that is understanding that your system is really secure versus just going through a number of steps to make sure you've complied with whatever the rules, regulations, laws, and whatever are. How has that concept, how has that process changed over time, where you and your colleagues can become more and more sure that as you take that risk assessment, that you really have a good visibility into what your level of security is rather than what your level of compliance is?
I think continuous assessment is important. You have to check yourself before the regulatory bodies come for you, or before the external auditor comes for you. Continuously assessing yourself and making sure that the security controls that you're putting in place are actually achieving the outcomes that you need them to achieve. It also includes hiring the right type of people, because then they have the strong work ethic to care about security. And all you have to then do is explain the whys of the things you're implementing to them, and they're able to help ensure that the organization, is as secure as it can be.
In terms of hiring the right people, has what that right person has skill-wise or does, or the way that she or he goes about doing the job, has that changed over time too, with the changes in the threat landscape, changes in regulatory framework and all those kinds of things? Or are the core things that make a good cyber professional staying pretty consistent over time?
I think it stayed consistent over time. In my opinion, it's continuous learning. You have to be a lifetime learner. I started 20 years ago. Nobody cares what I know about dust if I can't tie it to what we're doing today and how that benefits that. But I think more important than the skills, because skills can be taught, is work ethic. And this is where the hiring checks and the type of people you're hiring come in. It's if you hire the right people with the right mindset, that definitely helps. But in terms of have the types of IT security people changed then to now, it's curious people. I want to learn more. If there's something new, I want to know how it works and how it can benefit my organization and help us carry out our mission.
Tutu, it's great to talk to you. Thanks very much for your time today.
Thank you so much for your time.
Tutu Awade of FEMA. Technologists in government and industry have been frustrated over the last several decades by compliance exercises that may or may not result in better performance. I asked Ravi Jagannathan, Senior Director of Global Certification Assurance and Trust for Palo Alto Networks, how FedRAMP's doing at actually providing a more secure cloud as opposed to complying to standards. Ravi Jagannathan of Palo Alto, it's great to see you. Thanks for joining me. How's FedRAMP doing, do you think, at providing an outcome, more secure cloud, rather than a kind of a list of compliance exercises that people have to check off?
First of all, thank you for having me here. So, from the vantage point that I am at, I think FedRAMP is doing a decent job from my personal point of view in providing security solutions to the government agencies. It's also about how the product behaves and the overall security posture and deployment of the product. So I think it's doing a good job.
What would keep that momentum going, in your view? How do you see this evolving over time?
So FedRAMP is not static, right? FedRAMP is evolving. So we are going from Rev 4 to Rev 5, which FedRAMP PMO announced. So and it includes some supply chain controls. And then over the last 10 years, FedRAMP also has improved in its how the controls are implemented and the number of controls and how the agencies see it. So it is not a static standard. It is evolving. So it is adapting to the security needs of the day as it progresses.
How do you see the threat landscape changing, and what does FedRAMP need to do, in your view, to follow that, to make sure that it stays up to date with the needs of the agencies and with the vendors who are trying to serve those agencies?
So threat landscape changes because of the actors, all kinds of actors, good, bad, all kinds of actors. They also are evolving, and the technology is evolving. Like in crypto, it's from going to quantum crypto, right? So the technology is evolving, threat actors are evolving. So in accordance with FedRAMP and their controls is also changing, and it is adapting. And how the 3PAOs are assessing FedRAMP controls are also adapting to this new phenomenon as and when it happens. Mm-hmm. And FedRAMP PMO, in my opinion, they respond to it very quickly.
What do you see driving the continuing evolution? Is it just going to be the threat landscape, or will it be what the user experience should look like in the long term? What are some of the other factors that people should pay attention to?
User experience at the center of it. No matter how FedRAMP is evolving, how the products are evolving, or the threatscape is evolving, users are always at the center of it, right? How, for example, end users experience the product. All kinds of threats and the landscape may be happening within the scope of FedRAMP, but the end user, to a large extent, it should be seamless to them, how they experience the service. How they experience the service is very critical, and it should be easy, intuitive, and it should be seamless to the end user. There is also another kind of users that are there, that is the administrators of the services that are within the government agencies, and how they get to configure and deploy the services that the CSPs provide. That is also another user experience. At Palo Alto Network, we take user interface and user experience very seriously. We actually are moving everything to the left. Mm-hmm. We start considering how user experience should be and how it takes place right from defining the product requirement, functional spec, and the design spec and in our testing phase. So it is not much of a bolt-on thing. It happens right from the get-go. So that has been improving the user experience. We take that very seriously.
A little less than a minute left, Ravi. When you say how users experience the product, I wonder if maybe the end goal is that the users don't experience the product, that they don't know that there's a security solution involved. They're just going about their job.
That is definitely an important point. Security is something that needs to happen seamlessly. Users should not even be able to feel, hey, something is happening here. And I totally agree with that. As a matter of fact, if you look at a lot of the Palo Alto networks, how we deploy AI in SOC to basically crunch large amount of data that we have to ease users' experience, and how we deploy our network security and in the product development, those kind of things, we want it to be as seamless as possible. That is definitely our aim.
It's great to see you. Thanks for your time today, Ravi.
Same here. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Ravi Jagannathan of Palo Alto Networks. More innovation in government is coming. Don't go away. Listen at fedgovtoday.com and everywhere you get your shows. Don't miss out on the conversation. Follow the podcast today. Welcome back. Agencies in the federal government are using risk management principles in their cyber defenses now. Gabriel Davis is the Risk Operations Team Lead at the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency at DHS. He spoke here on a panel about risk management in cyber, and I asked him what message he wanted to convey in his remarks. Gabriel Davis of CISA, welcome. It's great to see you. Thanks for joining me today. What was the message you wanted to convey in your panel on the role of data and risk management in the new threat landscape?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. And what we really are trying to get to is we're trying to help organizations understand their attack surface. Using data to go after the vulnerabilities that we know threat actors like to use. We know they've leveraged in the past. So one of the key indicators on whether a threat actor is going to leverage a vulnerability for exploitation is whether or not it's been exploited in the past. And that's why we have the known exploited vulnerabilities catalog that shows the vulnerabilities that we know threat actors have used previously and that are likely to be used again. And what we're working on today is we're going to be adding in some additional context on which of those vulnerabilities have been used in ransomware campaigns as well.
Mm-hmm. So a risk management framework is really important. Agencies talk about using risk management frameworks for cyber defenses all the time now. It wasn't very common just a few years ago. What's that evolution look like in your view? And is there a risk management framework that's effective, or is just applying one for a particular instance or way an agency does business a better way to think about it?
So it's going to always be however it right sizes for the organization. There's no one size fits all. What these plans and these models we have, they're guidelines to help organizations build and mold their risk frameworks for their business processes. And what we have to make sure that we're thinking about is just risk at its basic. There's some threat, I have some vulnerability, and there's some likelihood that it can happen. And what we have to understand and really be comfortable with is that threat is never going to be zero. It's always going to be a non-zero factor. So there's always some inherent threat out there. And what we need to, the only things we can control are, the vulnerabilities that are associated with it. And that's how we'll drive down our risk.
You talked about data at the beginning of your remarks, beginning of this conversation. What has the evolution of data for cybersecurity, cyber defenses looked like, and where do you expect to see that evolution continue to go, Gabe?
I think what it helps us do is it helps us understand the practices of threat actors. It helps us understand better what they'd like to do, what they plan to do, and where they're operating. We can take historical data and match it against current data. That helps us understand where are the nuances, where are the unique traits of some activity. That's how we'll be able to detect threats in the future. Mm-hmm. So having that data, having it accessible, and being able to leverage it in such a way that is operational for our functions, that's going to be the difference.
Is the amount of data that organizations are collecting around their risk growing? Is the quality growing, or all of the above? Or what does that look like?
I would say all of the above, but at the same time, we have to be mindful about oversaturating our environments with data. All data isn't necessarily good for a particular purpose. So when we're gathering this data and we're storing it and we're normalizing it, we have to make sure that it's for a distinct purpose. And if there is no purpose, we have to be comfortable with not using it for some purpose that we think it's for.
How are the risks themselves changing? I imagine the data reflects the way that threat actors are trying to conduct different types of operations, penetrate different aspects, different parts of people's systems and so on. What does that look like?
So this is a bit of a good news and bad news situation.
Okay.
So the bad news is threat actors are not stopping and they're evolving. They're always going to be evolving. What we've seen in the past is phishing be a very largely used initial access vector. Now what we're seeing the transition in using phishing as well as gaining valid credentials on organizations, from valid accounts, whether that's from some third-party market or compromising the system itself through a phishing email. So we're seeing now this stacking on effect of different types of tactics to get to the same end state. But the good news is we're aware of this. We're aware of this because of the data. We can go back and look and see the trend analysis on the transition from purely phishing being the most predominant way that threat actors are compromising networks to phishing and valid accounts.
Yeah.
So what that lets us know is, hey, on top of doing your normal phishing security, like your multi-factor authentication that's phishing resistant, we also need to be very wary of account management.
I think that's a good news story also in the fact that it means that some of the things that agencies have worked on, in particular in the federal government, are working. Some of the things that they have, ways they've trained employees and ways that they have tried to harden their defenses are working because the threat actors have to do different things. They're not able to continue to do the same things and have what they believe to be success. Is that a fair read, do you think?
I would say that is fair, right? So if they were doing the same things over year and we were seeing the same results, then that would be problematic. Seeing different results year over year lets us know that, what we've done in the past is working, but also we need to keep doing those things and these things as well. So that's the key factor, is there's no one way to do it. We have to be iterative with our processes.
Where do you see this all going in the next 3 to 5 years, Gabe? What does the data and risk management landscape look like in the cyber realm?
Organizations are going to become more mature in their security. What they're going to do is they're going to take that data and they're going to use some tools, some functionality that they have available to them. They'll normalize it and they'll ask themselves hard questions. They'll say, hey, how am I performing against other organizations within my same sector or my same geographic area? And what that'll do is that'll help the organization mature even further. Things like the cyber performance goals are a way that organizations can take some data, apply it to that framework, and ask themselves, am I meeting the standard for a baseline level of security?
It's great to talk to you, Gabe. Thanks very much for your time today.
Really appreciate you having me.
Gabriel Davis from CISA. Speed is another factor agencies cite on their list of enhancements they'd like to see in security solutions. I asked Anil Carmel, co-founder and CEO of RegScale and former Deputy Chief Technology Officer of the National Nuclear Security Administration, what the FedRAMP program could do to speed up its approval process and make it more efficient. Anil Carmel of RegScale, is great to see you. Thanks for joining me again. What would you like to see FedRAMP do to make it easier, faster, more efficient maybe is a better word, for people to get through the program to be able to serve customers in government?
Well, ultimately what we're seeing in industry, which FedRAMP has helped take a hand in, is leveraging automation and standards, right? So FedRAMP had a hand and partnered with NIST in creating this new standard called the Open Security Controls Assessment Language, right? A machine-readable standard to submit and assess compliance packages, right? As opposed to manually having to stare and compare what changed in these documents. So leveraging standards and automation is the way that we're going to be able to get more cloud service providers authorized faster and deliver tangible business value to the government.
Do you have a sense of where the greatest potential is for automation in that process, Anil?
Well, so I mean, it's a couple steps. So first is in the actual management of those packages as they're created. So you have to create the packages, right? But keeping those packages continuously up to date is a manual, time-consuming process. So from a CSP perspective, being able to, cloud service provider, being able to integrate with the tools that you have already to keep your packages up to date is one area where automation can save a lot of time and money, right? Then outputting those packages in both a human and machine readable format is a way that you can save a lot of time and money, because the recipient of those packages can quickly assess what those changes are because they're presented in a machine readable file that can be parsed versus a human has to go read those. And now you're able to find what those actual challenges and problems are, where compliance becomes an outcome of good security.
As the process of getting into the program evolves, what are you seeing evolution-wise for the program itself? How are you seeing FedRAMP respond to the changes in the threat landscape that have evolved over the last 11 or so years that it's existed?
Well, I applaud the FedRAMP program for understanding that automation was the only way that the program is going to be able to scale to meet the needs of the government to consume secure cloud services. So developing and employing automation in the program so that cloud service providers can be quickly assessed and continuously monitored to provide secure cloud services to the government is really the only way that FedRAMP is going to be able to consume and deliver packages that can be authorized for the government to go use and say, yes, this has been certified.
So 11 years in, the threat landscape looks a lot different. The technology landscape all across government looks completely different than it did a decade plus ago. What do you anticipate happening in the next 2, 3, 5 years, and how would you like to see FedRAMP follow that trend or walk alongside that trend in order to be prepared to meet whatever those challenges are?
Absolutely. So security right now, as you stated, the threat landscape is continuously changing. The tools that we have implemented and are being developed will continuously evolve, right? Compliance is traditionally done in paper, in Word documents and Excel spreadsheets that are instantly out of date the moment that they're created. So there's an inherent cadence mismatch between the threat landscape and the compliance artifacts that have to be developed to certify that we're doing what we say we're going to do. So it's not so much compliance as imagined, but we need compliance as implemented. So we need to effectively bridge the divide between security in the threat landscape and compliance. So this takes a new operational model, right, that you'll need to think about of how do you bridge the divide between these two. This has been done before, by the way. Development operations was created to allow you to securely develop and deploy applications into environments. So if you take the principles of DevOps, apply them to this domain of security and compliance in something you can think of as regulatory operations, now you can build RegOps pipelines to securely create a continuously compliant documentation on demand that integrates with the security tools you have with that ever-evolving threat landscape, understand where the control gaps are, address those control gaps in near real time, and then output the documentation that stakeholders need to see showing compliance as imagined is actually as implemented.
Neil, it's great to see you as always. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me, Francis.
Anil Carmel of RegScale. The White House executive order on customer experience has made an impact on how agencies think about cybersecurity. I asked Matt Topper, President and Solutions Catalyst for Uber Ether, about the intersection of cyber and CX. Matt Topper of Uber Ether, welcome. It's good to see you. What's the intersection that you see of customer experience with securing the cloud through programs like FedRAMP?
Yeah, so the biggest challenge I've seen with customer experience is that the federal government's a different level. A lot of commercial SaaS companies, software vendors will come in and be like, oh, it's like customer experience in the commercial world. No, this is really a lot of times life and death and jackpot situations with highly, highly funded nation-state actors. And to combat those threats is a different level of thinking and a different level of trust you have to build with the customers to prove that you are doing what you say you're going to do over and over and over again, and really prove out that the trust is there, and showing them proactively how you're doing it and making them feel comfortable to allow you to protect their most sensitive data in many of these cases. So that's really where I see a lot of the SaaS companies struggling, is because they come in assuming that it's going to be, just another commercial customer, and don't really invest in no, these are people that are protecting the nation's biggest assets.
Yeah.
These are protecting every single citizen's data. These are protecting literally national security missions in a lot of these cases. And it's not easy to trust people, right?
Yeah.
We're programmed not to trust from the federal side.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I imagine it's difficult for companies sometimes to wrap their heads around the stakes that these agencies are dealing with, because as you say, it's everybody's data, and it's very, very high level national security information in many cases.
Yeah, a lot of times they're not realizing how big these data sets are and how powerful they are to adversaries coming after them. And our organization sits in an interesting area. We do identity and access management, so both from all the executive orders, the pushing to phishing-resistant credentials, right? We all have moms who have the notebooks full of the passwords still written in them. And a lot of times I go, that's actually better, because they've got different passwords for each one of those websites that they've written, versus the one jackpot password of, my mom's is my 3 sons, la, 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 right? Like, of course, right? But right, we do all the identity and access management side, but then we do all this ATO acceleration side. And we have to teach people that it's not just deploying good software. It's looking, where did that software come from? Where are you trusting the source repositories? Yeah, it might come from Red Hat, or it might come from an NPN major repository that there's a whole bunch of open source developers, but do you know who the developers are on that side? How do you know that things aren't being interjected? That's exactly what we've seen with SolarWinds and all the supply chain issues over the last 3-5 years at this point, and really showing the customers how you drill down to build that trust, and then continually showing them through customer experience of, hey, we're proactively looking at this. Hey, we see this on the commercial side. Are you doing this on your side? Or, hey, we've already started doing this on the commercial side. We're bringing it to you. That's the type of thing from a customer experience that I see a lot.
Being that you're in the identity space and we're at this FedRAMP event, you must sit at a pretty interesting intersection of the zero trust world and what's going on in the FedRAMP program, I imagine, Matt.
We do. It's funny. I've been pushing the industry to stop using zero trust, because obviously it's everyone's favorite buzzword and way overused.
Using the term or using the school of thought?
The term. My attitude is we really should have, and I actually had this discussion with Evan Gilman, who runs Spiffy, last week, that we should move it to define trust, right? Because everyone's taking this stance of, we trust nothing, we do nothing. Well, at the end of the day, we've trusted too many things and implicitly trusted them all over the place. We're just pulling package updates. We're just pulling new things from all over the place, trying to get a mission done. Well, we need to shorten that down and really build what the industry calls trust agents. Of, if I'm going to build something in this industry, this is the place I know to go trust, whether that's how my credentials are getting created, how my workloads are being defined and secured, even down to who's signing what documents, that signing system is the same one over and over and over again, and it's not some random pop-up that showed on the network. So that's been my big push, is really getting to define trust and having organizations explicitly think about that. And when we work through working with vendors to get them FedRAMPed on our platform, that's what we help them focus on. And once you get to that mindset, they very quickly go, oh, that's why FedRAMP seems so hard, but it's not, because you're just distilling down where did that trust come from? How are you going to continually validate it? And then how are you going to continually show that you're maintaining it? And they go, oh, this really wasn't that bad. It's just a flip.
Yeah. Great insight, Matt. Thanks very much for joining me today.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Matt Topper of Uber Ether. If you missed any part of this Innovation in Government program, you can watch the show in its entirety at fedgovtoday.com. Thanks very much for watching Innovation in Government, presented by Carahsoft. Don't miss FedGov Today every Sunday morning at 10:30 on ABC7 in the DC area, or on the FedGov Today channel on YouTube. I'm Francis Rose. Have a great night.